We let that nice piece of music play out to its finality. Thank you very much for joining with me this evening. My wife Kathleen is in the chat room. You have a large group of folks in the chat room tonight, so excellent. Very cold. Here in New Hampshire, we have about 2 inches of snow on the ground. I know in Boston it's snowing there as well, and a few other people I see in the chat room are experiencing some snow. Just let me know if you can see and hear me okay in the chat room. Before I move along too far, Eileen says beautiful music. Thank you. Give me a heads up in the chat room, folks. And again, we have a lot to cover this evening. Excellent. Thank you. Thumbs up, and smiles all around. Great. That's always nice to know. The snow hasn't affected us. I do want to point out right at the beginning, we do have snowplow service here in the area, and when they come through, they'll be honking and indicating we all have to move our vehicles out of the way so they can clear the streets. And so if that happens, I'll just put some music on. It'll take me about 5 minutes, and we'll get back to our live stream. So no worries on that. We are going to again continue to talk about banking this evening. The reason I'm going into so much depth about banking is because obviously it affects everyone. It affects all of us. And by now, after 2 editions of Entangled magazine focusing on banking, specifically Libra, cryptocurrency, and blockchains, I want to take you in a little bit different direction in banking, and that will be highlighted by the article I sent a couple of days ago on HSBC. But this evening I'm going to take you into an area of, let's call it private paper. This is not off the books, but it is banking transactions that are taking place with investment papers, stocks included, that you really don't hear very much about. But it makes up 95% of the financial activity in the world outside of currency exchanges and currency speculation and currency investments. The reason this is important to you is to know that banking is not just limited to the private sector. Banking's not limited to privately traded stocks on the stock exchange, to real estate, to mortgages, and the average business loans that are based upon debt. I'm going to show you where loans are made based upon equity. Completely different direction. Why is this important to you, for you to know? Because really 95% of the banking activity doesn't really hit public knowledge. And yet the HSBC migration of billions of dollars into the blockchain, just a few days ago this was announced and I shared with you, sort of opens that private door into private equity, private paper trade, to show us, the average people who are not the elite, and we're talking about banking for the elites. HSBC gives us a window, gives us a doorway into looking at that world where 95% of the banking is taking place, the financial transactions. And if HSBC is going public with their move to the blockchain of about a quarter of their assets that they control, again into the billions and in the B billions, we need to stop and take notice. Because this 95% sector of the financial world, like HSBC, is poised to move into blockchain. Now, this is something that, as I began to introduce Libra to you, I indicated to you that there will be a tsunami. There will be a rush by the banking sectors first, then the business sectors, and then finally private individuals into the Libra blockchain system, the cryptocurrencies, but blockchain that also records transactions besides just cryptocurrency transactions, and I'll share a little bit of history on that for you today. We may actually, if we have time, go even further into history and talk a little bit about the Knights of Malta. And I would like to share with you, just as a touch point, and we'll go to our scripture for the evening. This is where Malta is located. Okay, so we have Italy, the Mediterranean, and the island of Malta. And so we may dive into the Knights of Malta and a little bit of that history if we have time. Okay? But what I want to share with you overall tonight is looking at we as the average person. We are now going to look at the 95th percentile of financial transactions, where they occur, that are rushing headlong in this tsunami to blockchain with their assets. The important thing to understand is, as the bankers go, so do you and I. Our banking information, our funds, our investments, our retirement funds and portfolios, our privately held stocks, equities, if you have gold and silver, everything is moving to the blockchain. So again, HSBC indicating their move to the blockchain fits into the scenario that I laid out for you that would begin, and that is the rush to blockchain. And I'm being repetitive here, but I want to drive home the point. It's already begun. It began before HSBC by many of the banking institutions. And again, in the private, I'm calling it the private paper area, and I will define that and go through that for you. But most transactions, even though they are in this country, in the United States, regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, they're not really public. They're private transactions. They don't go through the stock exchange. They don't go through the Federal Reserve. They don't go through a bank per se as a loan transaction or an exchange of equities in a bank. They occur pretty much private to private party transactions. So we need to understand, when we talk about this move to the blockchain, that it's much bigger than we really appreciate. Because so much of the financial transactions in this world occur behind closed doors, again, by the elite. And this is what organizations like HSBC, JP Morgan Bank, your average banks like Wells Fargo and Bank of America, they are primarily focused on this private paper because it's the majority of their business. It's not making loans, personal loans to people. It's not making home loans to people. It's not handling your 401k and your IRA and your KEO. Banks make the majority of their money through brokering financial investment transactions. They make their money as the middleman. They handle the transactions. They manage the funds. They invest funds. But they also are the middleman in transactions in these private paper exchanges. And these are for individuals of wealth, and they are for businesses. As a side note, I mentioned mortgages. And we all know from 2008 in the United States, the mortgage meltdown in the banking industry that took place. Just a very short little sidebar. What do banks do with those mortgages? You come to the bank, you get a mortgage for a house. What happens to that mortgage, to that paper that the bank is holding? They sell it in the open market. They package it, they bundle it with basically 4 different ratings of risk: A paper, B, C, and D paper. Meaning that if you have an A paper, it's low risk, and D paper, it's high risk. But the high risk is charged more interest to that customer. The better customer, better interest rate because of their financial profile, including their credit rating. They get a lower interest rate, and they are considered low risk A paper. But what the banks do is they bundle A, B, C, and D paper, and they sell it into the investment community, and investors will buy up these bundled equities, these bundled papers. They're not equities, they're bundled debt. In the largest example, the largest extreme, are derivatives. I've mentioned derivatives many times in the past. Derivatives represent the largest sector of debt in the world. This isn't just United States, US centric. Derivatives are sold worldwide in the open market. And it is bundles of debt. Not just mortgages, but business debts, sovereign country, nation debts are sold into the derivatives market. If the derivatives market ever collapses, it will bring down all the economies of the world. It far exceeds in dollar value that of the US debt. In fact, derivatives as a debt structure exceeds in its total all of the combined debt of all of the countries of the world. It's beyond the quadrillions. It's into the sextillions. It's just incomprehensible money. This is why I said in the December issue of Entangled magazine, there's going to be a debt reset. And if we kind of work backwards, the debt reset comes after the economies of the world collapse and keep stepping back further. That is promulgated by war in the Middle East that we know from the book of Revelation, from Ezekiel, from Isaiah, from Jeremiah. Okay? So we know all of this is coming, and why I sort of do all this doom and gloom is so you're prepared, so that you're psychologically prepared, but spiritually prepared is the more important factor. So let's go to our piece of scripture for the evening. Luke 8:29. And hopefully I have it here. Too many tabs open, folks. No, I don't mean beer tabs. I don't drink. All right. Looks like I'm going to have to... I'm sorry, I had it open, but I've got too many tabs open now. Pardon my typing for just a moment. Okay, Luke 8:29 from the NIV. For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. Again, just another example of how Scripture takes on such an entirely different meaning within a different context, the context of today, and now the context of banking. I had this image in the magazine this month of these chains, and I think it's extraordinary. We already know that Jesus has broken the chains that have bound us to sin, even though we still struggle with it. But we are not fettered, as it says in Scripture, by chains, the spiritual chains. But the remainder of the world is fettered, is subject to the chains. And isn't it interesting, Kathleen and I have talked about this several times, that Satan chose the word chain, specifically blockchain, for his beast system. Again, it's always the counterfeiting of Scripture. It's the counterfeiting of God's creation, the counterfeiting of what Jesus has taught us. Satan is teaching the world in his 180 of what Jesus has done. Jesus broke the chains. Satan in his 180 is enslaving, is bringing the chains, the blockchains of enslavement to humanity. And so we need to be spiritually prepared for this. We need to be psychologically prepared for this. We need to know what's coming. It isn't for the purpose of being fearful. It's so that we understand how the world is operating in its details. Okay? Now, when we look at the blockchain, I think we should also bear in mind what I said at the end of the December issue of Entangled magazine, and that was that these blockchains are reminiscent, if you will, of our DNA. Because in the strands of DNA, the double helix, DNA forms chains, protein chains. So the DNA of the beast system is the blockchain, just like our chains of protein that make up our DNA that God created. And the control mechanism of the beast system, blockchain infrastructure, the control mechanism is the RNA, which is the control mechanism of our DNA. But their RNA for the blockchain is Libra, related to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, as I show you here on the November issue of Entangled, with the scales. And the scales refer to the mark of the beast. If you don't have the mark of the beast, you won't be able to buy and sell. And scales were used in the marketplace for buying and selling. But if you look at the history of scales, it also shows you in Scripture that the dishonest merchant loves the imbalanced or the dishonest scales because he can cheat the customer who's thinking that the scales are honest weights, the weights and measures. We are weighed and measured in God's eyes. But in the apocalypse, we have the imagery here of Libra. This is the Libra coin. Okay, it won't be a physical coin, but this is their reason for calling it Libra, is because it's related to the scales of the astrological sign of Libra. Okay? So that's kind of a mixed message and a mixed symbolism there, but it's all there. It's clear. It's easy to pick out, easy to understand. But the rest of the world doesn't understand it. You and I can see it. We can discern this very easily. We understand that famine is represented by the scales, as well as the mark of the beast, and a new system, a new economic system is what the scales represent, that is cheating humanity, just like the dishonest merchant with the imbalanced scales. This whole infrastructure system is designed to enslave, to wrap humanity in chains. And yet, as I go through this tonight and share some articles with you, it was designed and promoted as a way to break people free. Blockchain was designed, at least as how it was marketed when it was first the Bitcoin system, as a way to free mankind. But we have the ability through the Holy Spirit to 180 their words, their marketing pitch, and see that it is actually meant to enslave, to chain up humanity. Because all of the data, not just financial, but all of the data of the world will be trapped, enslaved, bound up in the chains of the blockchain. And the only way to operate in this world within that new system, that new economic blockchain system, is to take the mark of the beast. We don't need to worry about that. We don't need to take the mark of the beast. God will provide for us supernaturally. Now, I'm remiss in also addressing, before we get into the articles, Jesse and Levi and Deborah, whom we're keeping in prayer for their needs. I'm not going to cite the needs, but if you would, just in general, pray for them, for their needs. I don't want to embarrass anyone, okay? Okay? So Deborah, Levi, and Jesse, and I know that we have others in the chat room. I won't cite their names, but there are a couple of people in the chat room tonight that have emailed us as well. So just as a group of patrons, please keep each other in prayer. It's necessary. Facing what we're talking about in these live streams, we need to uphold one another in fellowship. Okay? You know, in November and December issues of Entangled, I went into great detail and nuts and bolts and explained all of what's going on with Libra and what's happening. But I didn't really give you a foundation of the history of blockchain. So if I may, I want to just very briefly go through an article posted on February 16th of 2018 in Forbes by Bernard Marr. And I think this is a great summary. It's very brief, but I think it'll give all of us a good, solid foundation of what was the original intent for blockchain and where it's going. So when Satoshi Nakamoto, whose true identity is still unknown, released the white paper entitled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system in 2008, that described a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash known as Bitcoin. Blockchain technology made its public debut. Blockchain, the technology that runs Bitcoin, had developed over the last decade into one of today's biggest groundbreaking technologies with potential to impact every industry from financial to manufacturing to educational institutions. Here's a brief history of blockchain technology and some thoughts about where it might go in the future. Now, he's not writing from the spiritual perspective, so we already know from the last two issues of Entangled magazine where it's going, but we're looking at the secular sales pitch for blockchain. Bitcoin beginnings. You can't discuss the history of blockchain technology without first starting with a discussion about Bitcoin. Shortly after Nakamoto's white paper was released, Bitcoin offered up to the open source community in 2009, blockchain had provided the answer to digital trust because it records important information in a public space and doesn't allow anyone to remove it. It's transparent, time-stamped, and decentralized. Blockchain is to Bitcoin what the internet is to email, a big electronic system on top of which you can build applications. Currency is just one. Blockchain separates from Bitcoin. Even today, there are many who believe Bitcoin and blockchain are one and the same, even though they are not. Those who started to realize around 2014 that blockchain could be used for more than cryptocurrency started to invest in and explore how blockchain could alter many different kinds of operations. At its core, blockchain is an open, decentralized ledger that records transactions between two parties in a permanent way without needing third-party authentication. This creates an extremely efficient process, and one people predict will dramatically reduce the cost of transactions. When entrepreneurs understood the power of blockchain, there was a surge of investment and discovery to see how blockchain could impact supply chains, healthcare, insurance, transportation, voting, contract management, and more. Nearly 15% of financial institutions are currently using blockchain technology. Okay, again, the date on this article is 2018. Ethereum rises. Smart contracts. Vitalik Buterin, co-founder of Ethereum and Bitcoin Magazine, was also an initial contributor to the Bitcoin codebase, but became frustrated around 2013 with its programming limitations and pushed for a malleable blockchain. Met with resistance from the blockchain community, Buterin set out to build the second public blockchain called Ethereum. The largest difference between the two is that Ethereum can record other assets such as loans or contracts, not just currency. Ethereum launched in 2015 and can be used to build smart contracts, those that can automatically process based on a set of criteria established in the Ethereum blockchain. This technology has attracted the attention of corporations such as Microsoft, BBVA, and UBS, who are intrigued by the potential of the smart contract functionality to save time and money. Okay, so then he goes into talking about proof of stake and mining, things that I covered in the December issue of the magazine. Let's go to the last comment here. Blockchain scaling on the horizon. Since currently every computer in a blockchain network processes every transaction, it can be very slow. A blockchain scaling solution would determine how many computers are necessary to validate every transaction in a way that doesn't compromise security. Today, Bitcoin is just one of several hundred applications that use blockchain technology. It's been an impressive decade of transformation for blockchain technology, and it will be intriguing to see where the next decade takes us. Well, I would say it's going to be more than intriguing, as we have already laid out here. So there's your basic foundation to it, in case you were wondering. But I think, again, it's the topic of smart contracts is the point at which you begin to see more than just financial assets, for example, that are under management by HSBC and other banks, because it's too easy to become focused on cryptocurrency like Libra and not take into account the movement, for example, of Facebook's, its user data, and migrating all of that into the blockchain, which they've already done. This is almost 2 years old now, that information. The point is that healthcare records, insurance records, not just transactional, not just smart contracts, but public records and private records into the blockchain system. So it's inevitable. I mean, this tsunami is already on shore. It's already flooding the villages. It's already flooding the streets. It's not a matter of if it's going to or when, it is now. The tsunami has already broken on the shoreline. Okay. Something that just came up a couple of days ago is intriguing, and again is kind of another one like this HSBC that I'm going to go to in just a moment. But this is another one of those doors that kind of cracks open a new viewpoint on blockchain. And this again has to do with Ethereum. Not with the founder of Ethereum, but one of the members of the Ethereum project, Virgil Griffith. A member of the Ethereum project faces up to 20 years in prison for breaking U.S. sanctions. Now, we're going to go to 40,000 feet on this one because I'm going to show you the bigger picture related to sanctions and cryptocurrencies. This comes to us from ZDNet. This was November 29th of this year. Author is Caitlin Simpanu from Between the Lines is the original source of this article. Cryptocurrency expert arrested for giving talk to North Korea about avoiding sanctions. Now, before we get into this, I'll go ahead and go to 40,000 feet. I gave you the background, a little bit of the background on blockchain. The big deal with cryptocurrencies, when they were first marketed, when Bitcoin was first produced, was to sidestep banking institutions, to move away from the restrictions placed upon the average person. Remember, peer-to-peer transactions. It was designed for the average Joe Bag of Donuts to be able to operate in a banking community apart from the banking community, to operate in a buying and selling, although it hasn't really reached that crescendo of buying and selling because you can't take Bitcoin into Walmart, as I've said over and over. But the idea was that you could invest in something that would increase in value, so it was speculative. But the sales pitch for Bitcoin and then Ethereum and others was that eventually these could be used for the average everyday person to use in daily transactions. It has not arisen to that level yet. Okay? But the idea was that you had a sense of freedom using Bitcoin because you didn't have to go to the bank for your monies. You didn't have to go through the stock market to invest. You didn't have to buy real estate through a broker or through a bank in order to secure that real estate, because real estate became one of the principal places where Bitcoin was accepted in trade. So the big picture from 40,000 feet related to sanctions is related to the original design of cryptocurrencies was to circumvent the banking system for the average person, peer-to-peer transactions apart from banks, and that you could send money around the world through the blockchain apart from the banks. It is this apart that I want to emphasize. This is where Virgil Griffith got in trouble, because it wasn't the banking system that he was apart from, but it was the U.S. federal government who had placed sanctions, trade sanctions, on North Korea. And we all know about sanctions, Iran, etc. Okay? He tried to take the model for cryptocurrencies, circumventing apart from the banking system and moving apart from U.S. sanctions. Well, he couldn't do that. Why did the banking community allow Bitcoin and Ethereum and others to operate apart from them? Why didn't the banks try to squash cryptocurrencies? Because they knew what the game, they knew what the long-term picture was. They were at 40,000 feet and could see the game board. Because the banks, as I've demonstrated to you in the last 2 issues of Entangled Magazine, the banks have always been a part of the move to a cryptocurrency. to the blockchain. The banks have always been a part of it. But the average person thinks that they're operating apart, separate from the banks with cryptocurrencies, when in fact, from the bigger picture perspective, they're still trapped. They're still chained to the banking system. Now, the federal government had a problem with Mr. Griffith trying to move apart to get North Korea to be able to develop their own cryptocurrency so they could be in a position to move apart from the U.S. government's sanctions. How would they do that? That would be through a cryptocurrency for buying and selling those things that were prohibited in trade by the United States government. Businesses were sanctioned, meaning that they could not do business with North Korea. Well, if it didn't involve the banks in terms of US dollars or currencies from other countries, those other countries could avoid, through the blockchain system, through the use of cryptocurrencies, could buy and sell independent of the sanctions of the US government, because they would be using a system that is viewed as outside the control of the US government. The blockchain system. I know it sounds a little convoluted, but just think of it this way. North Korea could do business with any of those countries that were under those sanctions by using a different form of currency to pay for what they wanted, and that which they could not obtain otherwise. So let's look at this article, because again, it kicks the door open a little bit. U.S. authorities arrested a cryptocurrency expert and member of the Ethereum project for traveling to North Korea and giving a presentation at a tech conference about using cryptocurrency and blockchain to avoid international sanctions. The man, Virgil Griffith, 36, a resident of Singapore, and a U.S. citizen, was arrested yesterday at Los Angeles International Airport and arraigned in court today, where he was formally charged. In a press release today, the U.S. Department of Justice said Griffith traveled to North Korea in April of 2019, where he gave a technical talk at the Pyongyang Blockchain and Cryptocurrency Conference. According to the Department of Justice criminal complaint, the State Department denied permission and warned Griffith against traveling to North Korea to attend the conference. Despite receiving warnings not to go, Griffith allegedly traveled to one of the United States' foremost adversaries, North Korea, where he taught his audience how to use blockchain technology to evade sanctions. By this complaint, we begin the process of seeking justice for such conduct, said U.S. Assistant Attorney General John Demers. Okay, so you get the picture here. I'm not going to go through all the background on this stuff, but the idea here is Griffith was using the same model that Ethereum and Bitcoin originally designed to circumvent not sanctions, but to circumvent the restrictions within the banking community and the fees that are charged, the transactional fees that are charged in the banking community, freeing up individuals for peer-to-peer transactions with almost zero cost involved in those transactions. Okay? I'm giving you the focal point here, which is transaction fees. We're at 40,000 feet. The big picture, transaction fees. I pointed this out November and December in the magazine. The founders of Libra, they put up $10,000 apiece to be a founding member. Why do they want to be a founding member? Because it is only the founding members that have access to the transaction fees. Once this thing starts rolling and you get more and more people involved, more businesses involved, more governments involved in Libra, you move into the trillions of transactions per day. Now, the fees that are projected will be anywhere from 1/10 to 100th of a penny per transaction. But then you multiply that by trillions per day, and it's all going into the pockets of the founders, of which there are only 28 right now, but there will be as many as 100. They have just, based on transactions, okay, which was the reason for creating the cryptocurrencies, was to circumvent the banking world's transaction fees and governmental restrictions. We have Griffith, who was trying to circumvent sanctions using the same idea of circumvention, moving apart, but it didn't work. But the focal point that I'm extracting from all of this is for you to pay attention to transaction fees. Doesn't apply to you and me, except if we're involved in the system, and those that will be involved when they take the mark of the beast, those that are involved in that system, those transaction fees are negligible. They don't care. They're meaningless to the individual. Even to businesses, they're really meaningless. So why am I making such a big deal about transaction fees if they're meaningless to the users, even in the peer-to-peer transactions? Because it's the multiplication factor that results in an entirely new wealth generating system. You are looking at right now what I'm sharing with you, kicking that door open a little bit. You are looking at transaction fees that are astronomical in their valuations, that are more valuable than all the gold and silver on the planet, more valuable than any sovereign fiat currency, more valuable than any existing cryptocurrencies, and will do only the support of Libra cryptocurrency and the increased valuation of Libra alone, leaving all other cryptocurrencies to become obsolete. Because if you look at the increase in the valuation of Libra based upon the transaction fees coming into the Libra control mechanism of the founders, which is their reserve fund, that reserve fund increasing, filling its coffers with transaction fees, which only that very small group of founders will have access to. It renders all other cryptocurrencies obsolete and valueless. Okay? Because those cryptos are not tapped into the quantity of transactions that Libra will. And why will it be Libra? Because Libra will be the only blockchain system that the banking sector will move its assets into, as we're seeing right now with HSBC, of that private paper that I spoke of, followed by the business sector, the corporations, all moving into blockchain, not just their financials, but all of their records, all of their smart contracts, like with Ethereum. Then the average Joe Bag of Donuts, the average person in the peer-to-peer transaction world, and in that transactional world of going to Walmart with your Libra coin, everything in that stratification that I just gave you, from individuals to corporations to the banking sector itself, all generate transaction fees. Existing cryptocurrencies don't have access to that. They never were designed for that. Only Libra is. Remember, Libra is a transactional cryptocurrency. All others are speculative investment vehicles. and they will be worthless. And gold and silver will be worthless. The transaction fees is what's hidden, because it portends an entirely new economic system. People will be focused upon, like this whole announcement of Libra, that they hung the face of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook on it and called it Facebook's cryptocurrency. And I've demonstrated to you clearly that Facebook is only one of the existing 28 founding members. But because it has a huge database of users, they put that up, Facebook, as the public persona. Remember, this is all smoke and mirrors. This is all black magic, literally. I'm not being, allegorical here. This is black magic. So the magician distracts with one hand the audience while he's actually performing the trick with the other, unseen and unheard, unnoticed. That other hand that goes unnoticed that I'm revealing to you are the transaction fees. What the public sees, besides the stupid thing of Facebook, what the public sees is the value, and it will be an increasing valuation of the price of the Libra coins. They will go up in value. And that's all the public will pay attention to. So that's the one hand over here doing the magic trick for the public, for the audience, while the other hand is over here doing transaction fees. And those transaction fees are the real wealth generator. That's the gold mine. And that's what the bankers knew from day one when Bitcoin was launched. The bankers knew the long-term game because they were at 40,000 feet and saw the game board. So they didn't try to stop it. In fact, they quietly encouraged it to their elite customers, their wealthy customers. They said, don't worry, we're going to show you how you're going to benefit from this. Okay. That private paper we were talking about is known as private placements. And I think you've already read the article, but we'll just very quickly look at this, because I have a lot more to bring into this. Some of you may not have seen the article yet. It's in the archives on anthonypatch.com for patrons. HSBC moves $20 billion from paper to blockchain in one of the biggest financial deployments. We covered this in the last live stream. I'm not going to go into it. I'm just giving you the headline here as we're going to move along. Blockchain and banking continue to push new boundaries with a relatively untested technology, offering lots of promise and potential, but not finding too many direct uses as of yet. That's what I mean. You can't take it into Walmart. Okay? HSBC, one of the largest banking and financial services organizations in the world, headquartered in London, is planning to make a bold $20 billion step. The bank will be shifting $20 billion worth of assets to a new blockchain-based custody platform by March. Okay, remember, Libra is due to launch, they've stated, sometime in the first half of next year. Okay, so this is in March. HSBC is making this move. This is a vast improvement on the previous system, as the HSBC platform will digitize paper-based records. Those are smart contracts, okay, of private placements. Private placements are typically held on paper and lack standardization, which not only makes accessing them difficult and inefficient, but also points toward an archaic and outdated system. Okay, that's as far as I'm going to go with that, because I want to be able to describe to you what are private placements. This is a private investment in public equity and is often called a PIPE, P-I-P-E, a PIPE deal. Okay, private investment in public equity. It involves the selling of publicly traded common shares or some form of preferred stock or convertible security to private investors. It is an allocation of shares in a public company, not through a public offering in a stock exchange. PIPE deals are part of the primary market. In the U.S., a PIPE offering may be registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission on a registration statement, or it may be completed as an unregistered private placement. So when they say the primary market, this is what I meant by the 95% of what is going on in the financial world is in this primary market. The primary market is the part of the capital market that deals with the issuance and sale of equity-based securities to investors directly by the issuer. Investors buy securities that were never traded before. Primary markets create long-term instruments through which corporate entities raise funds from the capital market. It is also known as the new issue market, or NIM. In a primary market, companies, governments, or private sector institutions can raise funds through bond issues, and corporations can raise capital through the sale of new stock through an initial public offering, an IPO. So, instead of going through all of that and going through the underwriters, which bring a company public, they underwrite the IPO, corporations can make a primary issue or right issue of its debt or stock, which involves the issue by a corporation of its own debt or new stock directly to institutional investors or to the public, or it can seek additional capital from existing shareholders. Okay, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. We're just kind of hitting the highlights here, folks. I'm showing you, I'm opening the door to where 95% of the financial activity on the planet operates. And this is what HSBC is moving into the blockchain, and many others are as well. Okay, so we have private investment, we have the PIPE, we also have something called SEDA, S-E-D-A. In corporate finance, a standby equity distribution agreement, or SEDA, is a type of share allocation agreement between a company and a share purchaser. It is a form of private placement. A SEDA offers a relatively flexible way of raising capital, allowing companies to further customize their approach to capital and risk management. In a sense, SEDA is similar to a line of credit extended by a lender, except that the financing is done not through debt, but through equity. Okay, so come back on camera here and kind of explain some of this. In a private placement, and I'll be very simple about this with the example. In a private placement, as I just read under SEDA, let's say a business wants to raise money for the purchase of capital equipment. Okay, it wants to buy computers, milling machines, whatever. Capital expenditure. It has, for one reason or another, decided not to go to a bank for that money. One, the transaction fees and the interest charged on that loan is typically higher with a bank, whereas the transaction fees in a private placement transaction, private paper, is very low, and there's really no interest being charged. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. Typically, there's no interest involved in this loan. This is why SEDA is taking the equity in the company, offering that as collateral to someone who will buy stock in that company and provide in exchange for that stock their currency. And that currency goes to that business, they use the currency for that capital expenditure. Transaction fees are low and there's no interest. Why would an investor buy stock in that company, taking an equity position? That's what stock represents, is equity in the company instead of debt. Why would an investor do that? Because they're able to buy the stock at below market price. They get a discount. That's the enticement. And there's usually a schedule of these things, typically every quarter through the year. The company has already set up a schedule in which more stock will be sold to an investor. It's not necessarily an individual. It's typically institutional investors, large blocks of stocks that are bought at one time. And they can buy during the year on those pre-scheduled dates for the sale of those stocks. Never goes through the stock market. This is what I'm showing you, opening this door up to where the majority of financial activity takes place on this planet. So, to put it in context, this is why I threw up the red flag with the HSBC and said, I warned you, the banks are going to start shifting into blockchain. And almost within a week's time, we got the first public example of this taking place. The tsunami has already broken on the shore. The flooding is going through the beachfront communities, and it's headed inland, folks. It's headed inland. Okay. Okay. Just sorting through my email notes. I would like to share with you another piece of news. This has to do with the BRICS. This comes to us from Cointelegraph by Julia Magas, published November 26, 2019. BRICS nations discuss shared crypto to break away from the US dollar and SWIFT. Now, we just had Mr. Griffith present to the North Koreans how to avoid sanctions by using cryptocurrencies. In other words, the North Koreans creating their own cryptocurrency. Well, now we have a group of nations that want to move away from the US dollar and away from SWIFT, the core of the banking system, SWIFT, by having a shared cryptocurrency amongst those nations. This, like HSBC, an indicator of the tsunami, now you have nations moving to cryptos, to the blockchain in the tsunami. Now, the BRICS are defined as nation states, okay? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, otherwise known as the BRICS, is an economic bloc and are engaging in discussions to issue cross-national digital money. Okay? Cross-national digital money. Remember what I've been saying. No longer will there be a national sovereign currency. Nations will no longer hold their own currencies. This is saying here, discussions to issue cross-national digital money. That's doing away with national sovereignty within the blockchain environment, okay? Continuing. In order to reduce the dependence on their economies on the United States, as reported by Cointelegraph on November 14th. What will the new cryptocurrency look like? How does the BRICS group plan to use it? And are there any existing projects underway that seek to achieve a similar goal of independence on such a high level? You see that word apart, moving away from, being apart from the existing systems. But remember, this is all below 40,000 feet. This is all theater, folks. This is all the magic hands. There is no apart. The bankers have pushed the cryptocurrency because of the blockchain system that the bankers knew was designed to migrate all of their records, all of their assets into. That was the long-term picture of the bankers when Bitcoin first was founded, okay? All right, BRICS and its problems. BRICS is the largest geopolitical bloc of countries, spanning 3 continents and wielding substantial economic power in global affairs. As of 2018, the 5 nations of the BRICS bloc had a combined nominal gross domestic product of 40 trillion, or about 23.2 of the gross world product. However, such economic power does not come without competitive penchants from other nations that are vying for the markets that BRICS nations cater to. The greatest competition comes from the European Union and the U.S. The political experience of recent years has shown that BRICS countries' diplomacy has arguably failed in alleviating international sanctions, especially in politically sensitive markets such as the arms and the energy carriers markets. However, advances in technology are here to help out where politics cannot, as blockchain and digital assets have the potential to open entirely new horizons for finance. Again, this is moving apart. Mr. Griffith, in my opinion, did exactly what the BRICS are talking about. Now, the U.S. government can't hold the BRICS nations hostage. They can't arrest them for violation of the sanctions as they can an individual. Now, more sanctions can be thrown against a country that violates U.S. sanctions. That's how it works, back and forth. There can be freezing of assets of nations, assets that are held in U.S. banking institutions. That was done with Iraq. That has been done with Iran and Syria. The freezing of assets within U.S.-controlled banks. Okay? But when you have a group of nations pulling their collective weight together, there's very little the United States can do. And the United States won't. Because, again, this is below 40,000 feet. All of this has to happen. It's all part of the plan. The U.S. is not going to try to stop this. There will be State Department spokespersons that will raise red flags. There will be banking people that will protest. But understand, it's just one hand of the magician, because the whole system is designed to move to blockchain. These are just the skirmishes that go on that are the theater for public consumption. This is the leaders of the BRICS nations and their banking leaders and their corporate leaders trying to appear to their public that they are doing things for the benefit of the public financially, when in fact it's the complete opposite. It's the 180. It's for the enslavement of the public by moving everything into the blockchain. I'll continue here. Okay? The idea of a single cryptocurrency as a means of payments. That's what it says. The idea of a single cryptocurrency as a means of payments and value transmission is not a new one, but it is one that is being actively purported not only in countries like Venezuela with its petro, but also among BRICS countries. The advantages of a single cryptocurrency as a universal means of settlements among BRICS nations would solve many of the problems they face on the global economic market. See, there's a clearinghouse of transactions. There is a clearinghouse of debts and currencies. That's what SWIFT is. It's the Bank of Settlements. It's the settlements banks, okay? They want to move to a single universal cryptocurrency to move apart from the Bank of Settlements. All right, here we go. Again, Mr. Griffith, in my opinion, didn't do anything wrong. I mean, I don't like the violation of sanctions against a perceived enemy nation. That's not my point. Why I'm saying he didn't in principle do anything wrong is because the BRICS nations are doing exactly what he did. And here it is. A means of circumventing U.S. sanctions. The BRICS Business Council discussed creating a common cryptocurrency as a potential solution to these problems during the 11th BRICS Summit that was held in Brazil on November 13th and 14th, according to reports that cite Kirill Dmitriev, a member of the council. Dmitriev, who is the Director General of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, went on to say that an efficient BRICS payment system could be used to stimulate settlements between the countries while reducing the use of the US dollar for these purposes. Now, let me translate that last part. While reducing the use of the US dollar for these purposes. Translation of that for you is transaction fees. Okay? They don't want to pay the transaction fees. All right. It was also reported that the new system may become an alternative to the international payment mechanism SWIFT to facilitate trade with countries under U.S. sanctions. Okay, so they want to go around the Bank of Settlements existing system, which is the control mechanism of sanctions. And they want to carry on trade using a cryptocurrency that doesn't go through the SWIFT system of the Bank of Settlements, okay? Dmitriev also noted that in recent years, the share of U.S. dollars payments made between the BRICS countries has significantly decreased. In Russia, for example, in the past 5 years, the share of U.S. dollar in foreign trade transactions, see, remember these words, folks. These are things to bear in mind as we go forward in future live streams. Transactions, transactions, transactions. That's the new gold mine. Okay? That's the new economic wealth of the world. Transaction fees. The share of U.S. dollar in foreign trade transactions fell from 92% to 50%. This is in Russia. While those made in the Russian ruble rose from 3 to 14%. Well, of course the Russians are going to benefit because now they're making 11% more money off the transactions in foreign trade. The U.S. can't really do anything about this. Okay, so I'm going to skip through. Let me go down to the bottom here. Another one of the consultants, his name is Denis Smirnov. Great name, huh? Smirnov, a blockchain consultant from Russia, noted to the conference, the BRICS conference, noted to the conference the convenience and reduction of transaction costs as some of the advantages of creating a single cryptocurrency system for the BRICS countries, calling it an alternative to bonds. All right, I'm going to go back on camera here and take a drink of water. I know this sounds like, wow, you spent an awful lot of time talking about banking. But our world is designed around banking. That's what's in it for you and me. We have to understand where these big players are shifting to in the tsunami. Because the tsunami carries us. The tsunami impacts us. We're the villagers on the beach in the grass huts. We're the apartment dwellers and condominium owners on the beach, up on the top floor looking at the tsunami coming in below us. Where can we go? Maybe we're not being drowned, But we're surrounded, we're flooded. Okay? That's what's in it for us. And just when you go out and do your own research, when you look at articles, keep that word transactions firmly in your forefront of your research, because that's the new gold mine, and nobody's going to be talking about it. They'll mention transactions, as I just illustrated, but they will not do what I did for you and say the founders of Libra will earn huge amounts of money. This creation, this new creation system of new wealth based upon transaction fees, nobody's going to talk about that. You can find it. It's in the November issue of Entangled. You can find the information if you know enough to ask the right questions. Now you know enough to ask the right questions. Go out and research Libra founders and transactions and the reserve fund. Those are your hallmarks. Those are your keywords. And it'll open up those doors and you'll see it. And I know some of the patrons have emailed me and said, hey, I've gone to my financial advisor, and number one, claims to not know anything about Libra. And your financial advisors will certainly also say, what do you mean transaction fees? Gold mine. New form of wealth generation. A new system of wealth generation and a new form of wealth. Transaction fees. What are you talking about? That's what your financial advisors will probably say to you. Number one, any financial advisor that claims today to not know anything about Libra, to have never heard about Libra, much less know anything about it, is lying. They are told, do not educate your clients about cryptocurrencies. We don't want them going into cryptocurrencies. We want them to stay in our banking system because of our transaction fees in a bank or in an investment house that is managing your portfolio of investments. That fund manager does not want to lose out on those fees, those management fees that are also based on transactions. So they don't want you to talk about Libra. They don't want you to know about Libra. And they sure as heck don't want you to know about how much money they're making on transaction fees today and how much is going to be made in the Libra system on transaction fees. Because the guys at the top of any investment institution, any investment company, any investment house, and any bank, the guys at the top are the ones that are going to be making money off the transaction fees. No one else in the banking stratification will. Okay? The reason I can say that is, again, we look at HSBC, we look at the private paper, as I call it, the private placements. Okay? That's something else you can take and research on your own. Private placements. That's what's going on in the world. And private placements, that's the 90 to 95% of what's going on. And the only players in private placement transactions are the elite. Now, when you go and you look at things like the definition of private placements, you look at the regulations, you look at the SEC regulations, they will say that an individual must have an income of $200,000 to $300,000 a year to be someone who would be allowed to participate in private placement, peer-to-peer transactions. Okay? Well, that's chicken feed. There are very few players that are at that low level of income. Most of these people are into the multiple millions and multiple billions. Okay, this is why I'm saying Those in the lower stratifications of banking institutions and investment management, portfolio management firms, they will not have access to those transaction fees because they are not currently part of the private placement system. They don't qualify financially. So private placements are going to be, as a system that is described here in Forbes, as difficult and inefficient and archaic and outdated. That's what Forbes describes private placements to be. Here's your takeaway. If it's archaic, outdated, cumbersome, it's not transparent, it's difficult to manage, this is exactly what HSBC is saying is their reason to move into the blockchain. It's archaic, the system now. The 90 to 95% of the economic activity on the planet is archaic, according to Forbes and HSBC and other bankers. If it's archaic, the 180 to that is then you have to have a new system. What's the new system? Blockchain. Which one? The Libra blockchain. Why? Because Concordia, not Facebook, not the 28 founders, Concordia, November issue in Tangled Magazine, Concordia built Libra. It's Libra Group. It's Libra Association. It's Blockchain Summit. It's Blockchain Council Summit within the Concordia Summit, held every year in New York, concurrent with the UN General Assembly meeting in New York, because it's all the same players. They just walk across the street to each other's meetings. Libra is too far along to be displaced by any existing or soon to be launched cryptocurrency. Again, cryptocurrencies are designed not for transactions, but for speculative investment purposes. Only Libra is designed, and I shared with you in the December, Algorand, the algorithm, the encryption algorithm of Algorand, coupled with Dust Identity's nanodiamonds, that is the system already in place that ensures that Libra will always be the preeminent cryptocurrency. It will be the global one world currency. It's a standalone. It is apart from all other cryptocurrencies. It is apart. It circumvents, like the sanctions, it circumvents the existing system of private placement, 95% of the world's economic activity. It is circumventing that. It is moving away from the archaic system of the Bank of Settlements, that's SWIFT, the Bank of Settlements of transactions. It's moving away from the US dollar as the reserve currency, the petrodollar, the oil-based dollar, moving away like Russia and the other BRICS nations already are doing. So this is real time, this is in the present, and it's already underway. Therefore, you and I need to know about these things. And now you know more than financial advisors will admit to, or perhaps don't even know themselves. And that's the transaction fees, the new gold mine. Okay? This is actually kind of like a Thursday classroom day. It's so deep and detailed, and but you know, it's just because the magazine came out today, I felt that it was really important to really keep the momentum going and get into this. Okay. Okay, this is an article from CoinGeek, and this is dated April 15th of this year. And this involves a company called DQR, Digital Quantitative Research. DQR's Christian Handel, education is part of Satoshi's vision. The global adoption of, they say it right out front, folks. Okay? That's why I'm sharing it with you. The global adoption of cryptocurrency will hinge on the ease of use and accessibility, of its technology. Dr. Christian Handel, CEO and founder of DQR, joined CoinGeek's Becky Ligero to talk about his company's recent partnership with Genesis Mining to do just that. Now, that's not gold mining, folks. That's cryptocurrency mining. I defined that in this month's issue of the magazine. And why DQR has chosen to set up shop in Malta. So we are going to go to the island of Malta, and this will segue us over into a little historical background on the Knights of Malta. So I'll leave that up just for fun, just so you're not looking at me reading all the time. We were originally, let me back up, the story of how DQR and Genesis Mining decided to team up goes far back. It's a very interesting story, actually, Handel explained. We were originally purchasing Bitcoins directly from the founders of Genesis Mining, and this was before they even created the company. And then it was at such a frequency that they said, why don't you join and mine with us? It was a group of friends, and it was actually quite interesting. The reason they ultimately decided on a partnership had to do with the ease of use and an idea to scale to the greater market. Okay? Remember, just like transactions, just like the word apart, just like private placement, keep in your notepad there the word scale or scaling, because it's the ability to scale the cryptocurrency transactions to where the entire planet can be enveloped, can be enslaved in chains. It has to be able to scale. Existing cryptocurrencies are very limited in their ability to scale for transactions. That's what scale is really targeting, is transactions. Libra, however, is designed from the beginning to scale for transactions for the entire planet. That's another marked distinction between Libra and existing cryptocurrencies. Okay? The reason they ultimately decided on a partnership had to do with ease and an idea to scale to the greater market. Years later, we approached them and said, you know what? You guys made mining so accessible. Why don't we look at trying to make cryptocurrency, the exchanges, more accessible? So we founded DQR. DQR stands for Digital Quantitative Research. It aims to make it as simple as possible to get access to the cryptocurrency space. That's for the average person to have access, folks. And it isn't just restricted to existing cryptocurrencies. This is going to be rolled over into Libra. I'm showing you the building blocks of the blockchain. I'm showing you the components. I'm showing you the jigsaw puzzle pieces coming together so that you have a clear picture from 40,000 feet. Okay. Here's a quote. We're trying to make it easy to understand what it means to be in the blockchain space. What does blockchain mean? What does cryptocurrencies mean? So we have an education. We have research. We then make it very accessible to get into the space by creating simplified products. We look at trying to make the market more efficient, and then we have a foundation in the end. So all of our subsidiaries donate a percentage of their profit to this decentralized foundation. And that is how we are trying to fulfill the vision of Satoshi Nakamoto. That was the gentleman or the figurehead of Bitcoin, okay, Nakamoto. Of trying to, which is Nakamoto's vision, to try and make the economy more inclusive. Now, isn't that a word we've heard all over the place? Inclusiveness, right? It's all about inclusion. Well, that's just enslavement. That's one world government. That's one leader. That's one economy. That's one global currency. That's what inclusive means. That's our 180 at work right there, folks. DQR has set their headquarters in Malta, and they did so because they feel the island provides unique opportunities for a blockchain company. So we came to the island in December last year, and we immediately engaged with the government, and we spoke about the regulation topics. We went through what blockchain means to the people of Malta, how that can alleviate their, how that can elevate their presence in Europe. DQR's founder explained, we also took a lot of our experience from Germany and Switzerland and brought that also on board. And then at the same time, we said we are going to create a kind of education curriculum that we can work with the University of Malta or even in Germany. And we have information on our website, we have articles, we have videos, so it really makes it easy to understand about this space. Now let me share with you, I'm not going to read it, but there's some other articles I have that have indicated, just as Kathleen and I said about 2 years ago, we said at the elementary school level, Python is being pushed on these little kids at elementary school level to learn how to code in Python. Python is the predominant language utilized in the world of artificial intelligence, folks. Like education for Python is now pushing not just at the university level, but pushing down through the full levels of the education system. Children learning about blockchain and cryptocurrencies, following on the same heels, the same pattern of education in Python is education in blockchain for children. All right, continuing. Part of the reason they chose Malta was because of its storied history and culture. I think just like the Maltese Knights, blockchain has a certain property there. I know that they refer to the blockchain pioneers as kind of knights, protectors of the industry. There are certain values between the knights and the culture of Malta, as well as in the blockchain space. We're trying to reach out to those that are less fortunate. See, they always have to do that, don't they? The less fortunate. We're trying to build an economy that is much more inclusive. There goes my voice. Inclusive, right? And serve the underbanked. Now that's another term I've shared with you in November, and I've been sharing with you in some of the live streams. Something else to write down in your notepad: the underbanked or unbanked populations. This is all their politically correct verbiage for marketing, for pushing cryptocurrency and blockchain. Because there are all these people in the world that are less fortunate, that are not included in the banking system, that are underbanked or unbanked, and we need to bring them in. Well, that's the marketing. That's the mantra. That's the hissing of the python, of the serpent. That's the forked tongue, the underbanked, the unbanked that are not included, the underserved, the poor of the world. And then gets everybody else going, oh, they play on the guilt of those that are banked and those that are moderately to extremely wealthy. Of course, the extremely wealthy, they have no conscience, so forget about them. But the average Joe Bag of Donuts, they're going to appeal to that sense of, oh, yes, we do. We need to reach out to the unfortunate that aren't in the banking system. We need to include them. We need to wrap our arms around them and give them a hug. That's how they're selling the beast system. That's how the serpent, being so deceptive and lying tongue, is lying to the average person who has no clue about what we've been sharing here. The inclusiveness is so that every person is enslaved. Every person has the chains around their ankles. And every person has to take the mark of the beast. That's what inclusive means. That's the 180. Underbanked, unbanked, that's the 180. We need to enslave those people. They're not part of the system. You need to put irons around their ankles and enslave them in chains, in the blockchain. It's so obvious to you and I. I wish the whole world could hear this. But they're clueless. They don't want to. They don't want to hear it. Let's go to the Knights of Malta. I want to acknowledge, I'm not going to cite the name, but this direction towards Malta and the Knights of Malta was sent to me in an email by one of the researchers that sends me probably 30 emails a day of absolutely excellent research. Okay? And some of that research I do share with you, not all of it. But this I'm sharing from that source today. The Knights of Malta and their rule over the Maltese Islands. I'm going to put up a different graphic. Let me see if I've got it. Bear with me. Well, I'll leave that up for now. I have another graphic I'll put up in a second. The Knights of Malta and their rule over the Maltese Islands. When you read through different parts of my site, you'll notice that I often refer to the Knights of Malta. This is from the website called maltauncovered.com. Now, it's kind of a travel site and all of that, so this isn't, banking. The Knights of Malta, also referred to as the Order of St. John, ruled the Maltese Islands for centuries and left a strong mark. Well, isn't that funny? This is a travel agency website, okay? And they're promoting travel to Malta. And they say, and left a strong mark. Give me a break. A lot of the structures they built centuries ago are still very popular in sightseeing tours and excursions to Malta. The impact of the Knights on Malta and its history that is still highly visible today. You can find various buildings and landmarks around that have survived to the test of time. You can also see the influence of the Knights through the use of the Maltese cross. That symbol is still very much associated with Malta as a nation. The Knights of Malta were and still are a religious Roman Catholic and military order under its own papal charter that was established in the 11th century. Remember, folks, Kathleen and I have repeatedly said, if you want to know who the players are today, you have to examine history. You have to understand history. You have to understand the bloodlines. You have to understand the tracing of the bloodlines of the players back in antiquity, back in history, because the bloodlines determine who the players are today. So study history. That's why Kathleen and I, graciously, by your extraordinary financial support and your fabulous emails and your prayers, you have allowed us, you've given us the opportunity to be your researchers of history and to report upon it. So let me continue here. Before the established order existed, their predecessors, then referred to as the Knights Hospitaller, okay, almost like hospital, right? Or hospitality, the Knights Hospitaller, were associated with a hospital in Amalfi, present-day Italy. Their primary mission was to provide care for the sick, poor, or injured pilgrims returning from the Holy Land. Do you hear echoes of what I just read to you about DQR and inclusiveness? The underbanked, the unbanked, right? Okay. Malta, their primary mission was to provide care for the sick, poor, or injured pilgrims returning from the Holy Land, which refers to the present-day region of Israel and the Palestinian territories. Now, let me just toss in here, you guys, I'll go back on camera. You guys are well-versed in history on the Knights Templar and the Maltese Knights, the Knights Templar. That's the foundation of the banking system. You know this. They were protecting pilgrims on their pilgrimage by taking on deposit, so as to protect, taking on deposit their gold, their silver, if they had coin currencies, okay? Because there were raiders, there were pirates, there were thieves that would accost the pilgrims in their travels, and they would be robbed of all their financial holdings, whatever they may be. So those financial holdings were given, they were entrusted to the knights. Well, the knights then decided that, you know what, we could make some money. Transaction fees. Interest. We could manage these funds. Management fees. Interest. Transaction fees. Knights Templar. Knights of Malta. Nothing new under the sun. Same players are at work today as the times that I'm describing now in the 11th century. Same players from the same bloodlines. So they began to issue letters of credit and letters of deposit, monies on deposit, to the pilgrims, and they could go to Israel and Palestine, and at that end, that letter of deposit, that note of deposit, would be honored and could be cashed in for gold and silver and coins and food and lodging. They could conduct transactions. Of course, there was always a fee taken with every transaction. At the beginning point and the end point, there were always transaction fees. And the poor pilgrims, the Joe Bag of Donuts of the day, had to pay the transaction fees. And so their holdings would wither away. They were gnawed away at by the rats of the system at the beginning and at the end in transaction fees. But at least they weren't being robbed of all their money by the robbers along the routes of pilgrimage. But then the banking system developed in which letters of credit were issued based upon those assets which the Knights Templar really didn't have ownership of. It wasn't theirs. The Knights of Malta, holding monies that belonged to other people, assets belonging to other people, they would then say, you know what, we can do fractional lending, which is the system of today. In the United States, banks are required to hold a certain percentage of actual liquid assets on deposit. But fractionally, meaning a fraction of what is actually held in reserves, can be loaned. So let's use a fraction like 90 to 95%, a percentile. Of the monies on deposit, 90 to 95% of what's on deposit can be issued as loans and letters of credit to businesses and individuals, backed by this 5 to 10% of reserve assets, liquid assets held in reserve. That's fractional lending. This is how the banks are able to take money in and then loan it out, because they don't loan all of it out, only a fraction of it, fractional lending. That's our banking system. Transaction fees and interest are all charged in fractional lending. This is what got us into trouble in the mortgage industry in 2008 with the housing collapse. There wasn't enough held in reserve. Bad loans were made to people that had no ability to otherwise qualify for the loans at the extravagant loan values that were being put out for houses. They were borrowing more than they had the ability to pay. But nobody cared, because those papers, as I said at the beginning, those mortgage papers were being bundled into A, B, C, and D quality loans, packaged and sold into the marketplace. That's what propped up, that's what inflated the bubble, the housing bubble, was the selling of these portfolios of A, B, C, and D paper. These portfolios being sold again, sold again, sold again, sold again, because they were always trying to sell to the next guy that which the holder of knew was intrinsically worthless, that it was a bubble. So to the unsuspecting investor, they'd make it very attractive, and they would sell this worthless portfolio of mortgage paper. Some good mortgage, A, and horrible mortgage, D, paper, sold to the next unsuspecting investor. And this would go on and go on. It was a Ponzi scheme. It'd go on and go on and go on. And it went on for years, and all of a sudden, the bubble burst. Those in the investment world said, we're not buying garbage paper anymore. We're not going to buy worthless paper anymore. We don't want to be stuck with it. So we're stopping. Well, that spread like wildfire. You talk about the 1929 Depression. You talk about the collapse of the U.S. stock market. Nothing in comparison to 2008 with the collapse of the housing market. Now, it was propped up. There was quantitative easing by the feds. Interest rates were adjusted. The supply of money in the marketplace was adjusted by the Fed and the Treasury. Bonds were sold, propped it up, and we kind of recovered. 2010, we kind of skipped, and then we recovered again. But it's all fiat, folks. It's all propped up. It's all worthless. Libra will be worthless. Transaction fees into the trillions of transactions per day, generating transaction fees, all worthless. And you know it's worthless. But the majority of the world, let's call it the percentile I've been using, let's call the majority of the world the 95 percenters, the 95 percentile, which includes the elite, the super wealthy, the uber wealthy, okay, who are all rushing like the tsunami to get involved in Libra, HSBC, blockchain. They didn't say Libra, but I know it's Libra, that they're eventually going to label this blockchain that HSBC has moved into. They call it a vault, but all of this is evolutionary. It's all progressive. It's all the jigsaw puzzle pieces coming together, and that's what I'm sharing with you in these live streams. I'm sure there will be more financial jigsaw puzzle pieces I'll be sharing with you, because this impacts all of us. But it's the 95 percentiles of the world who've turned their face from God, who refuse and deny Jesus Christ, who refuse salvation, who will take the mark of the beast. So you've heard of the 1%ers. Now you have the 95%ers. And we'll go forward with that 95%er. And transaction fees. And apart. Okay? And the circumventing of sanctions. So I've given you a lot to chew on. There's more articles I have, but we're coming to a close here. If there are burning questions in the chat room, I'm happy to take a few of those. I guess the snowplow hasn't come by, so we're okay for now. And I'll try to answer your questions to the best of my ability. But if you have detailed questions, it's tough in the chat room to put things together. If you have detailed questions, just send it to me by way of email, anthonypatchauthor@gmail.com, or go to the contact tab at anthonypatch.com, or go through Patreon in the messaging system and just message me, okay, if it's a detailed question. All right, let me get a little bit of water here, and we'll jump into that. All right, let's see. If mortgage is not paid off, we will likely lose homes, right? Okay. All right. Whatever banking system we're locked into now is where we'll likely end up. Okay. Kind of pulling everything together here from your chat room. Okay, so here's the thing. I think that's related to my scenario that I put forth in the December issue of Entangled magazine, as well as in our last couple of live streams, and that's this. I mentioned this at the beginning. Economic collapse due to warfare, a debt reset, known as a jubilee year, every 7 years in the Jewish structure. Okay, Jewish system, Jewish belief, traditional system, Jewish tradition is every 7 years a debt jubilee, resulting in the forgiving of debts, returning of assets, land, and things like that to the original owners. Now, we don't own our homes. The question in the chat room related to mortgages and homes. I cannot honestly tell you what is going to happen when there's a debt reset. It's too complex. I know that the plans are in place, but I just don't know what they are. I can lend conjecture and supposition and kind of be a futurist, if you will, not a prophet, and, look and extrapolate, as I often say, extrapolate what might happen. The elite will not, I don't think, will not want people tossed out of their homes, because they want a system to be operational. I think the finer question is, if you do not take the mark of the beast, will you be allowed to stay in your home? Will you be allowed to keep your job? Will you be allowed to go to the grocery store? I don't think so. I think we as Christians who refuse the mark of the beast, we will be provided for both in our housing, our security, our food, by God himself, supernaturally. This moves into a discussion of the spiritual augmentation, the spiritual changes that God's children will undergo. It may be just as simple as this. When we talk about food, and again, I don't know, I'm just supposing here, this is supposition. We know that God will never forsake his own. That's the foundation. God will never forsake his own. Therefore, if we're talking about food, he may do away with our need for food. In other words, we could exist without being hungry. I'll be scientific for a moment. Tesla, ether, model of the sun with sapphire. The sapphire laboratory model experiment demonstrating definitively that the sun is gathering energy from the ether. Okay? The sun is not consuming itself. It's gathering energy all the time from the surrounding ether of the cosmos. Could it be that we too will gather nourishment from the ether? That God will provide to us supernaturally through our environment. And our need for shelter, likewise, may not be necessary. I don't know. But I don't have any fear about being locked out of this beast system. And I don't fear death. If it comes to decapitation, Noahide laws, I'm not afraid of it. I know that God takes care of his own. He doesn't forsake us. So there's no reason to be fearful about all this. But we need to pay attention to it, to know what's going on, and in your own way be able to use bits and pieces of what I share with you for witnessing to others. For the ultimate purpose of all of these live streams is for the salvation of souls through Jesus Christ, the one and only true Messiah. Okay, Josh is asking if the Antichrist will hold a year of Jubilee. The debt forgiveness. Who will orchestrate it? Maybe is another way of posing that question. A good question, Josh. It's an Antichrist system. It's an Antichrist spirit. It is an Antichrist system that is led by the Antichrist. The question more finely posed would be, will the identity of the Antichrist be revealed, and thus the Antichrist declare the debt jubilee? Line, signs, and wonders. If you've read the first few chapters of my first novel, Covert Catastrophe, in which I describe the debt reset, and the president is the one who hits the big red button on the podium with the debt clock above him that stops rotating and then goes in reverse to zero, the debt reset in front of the media in the book. I think the Antichrist will be known, he will be identified, and he will perform his miracle of the debt jubilee. I'll base that upon the Kabbalists, who are accelerating technology for their tikkun, their redemption of mankind through technology, to usher in, through the acceleration of technology, the ushering in of their Mashiach, which is the Antichrist. And therefore the Antichrist needs to be identified so that he can then take credit for the miracle of the debt jubilee, which people will demand because the economies have collapsed. Hegelian dialectic, December issue, Entangled Magazine. Problem, reaction, solution is their modus operandi. Always has been, always will be. So people will demand the solution be presented for economic collapse. The solution presented by the one world leader, Antichrist, performing lying signs and wonders is the forgiveness of debts, and then presenting the one world global currency as the solution, Libra and its blockchain, encompassing all human activities in the global beast system. Okay? Okay. Michael asks, did I hear Bloomberg today? That was Michael Bloomberg. Talking about taxing the poor because they don't know how to take proper care of themselves. Oh, yeah. Well, that certainly sounds like a Democrat. That sounds like a billionaire speaking, Bloomberg, right? All right, let's see. Explain how the Antichrist Jubilee will only get more people in debt or ensnared. Well, if the debts are forgiven, people will be ensnared not in debt, which is what we're all ensnared in now. All of the chains around our ankles right now, all of the iron bracelets around our ankles with the chains, the ball and chain, is debt. Because all countries operate in a debt-based system. If you eliminate debt, you bring in a new system. If it's not debt-based, it's equity-based, as I was just explaining in the example of private placements, papers, and SEDA, SEDA. The idea is that you trade equity, something of value, for something else. So what do you trade? If your debts have been forgiven, what equity do you hold that you can trade in order to participate in the new system, the new economy? What do you have to trade? What is your only equity? You have no debt and you have no assets. What's your equity that you have to trade in the new economy of the beast system? Your soul. Because you choose the mark of the beast so as to participate in the beast system, that last remaining piece of equity that you have is your soul. After all debts are forgiven. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden debts are forgiven and now everybody is debt-free, that now they have more money, that they have more liquidity, that they have more equity. You can't. You cannot have wealth because the wealth was derived from debt. All of our paychecks, all of the monies that you donate through Patreon, all of our savings and checking and investments inherently are worthless because they're based upon debt and debt spending, debt investment and debt spending. Therefore, when you eliminate debt, you eliminate the debt-based system, you eliminate all perceived wealth. It evaporates. Your equity is gone. You have no debt and you have no equity. You have no capital. You have no liquidity. You have no assets. It's all gone. Again, the debt reset comes after the collapse of all of the economies around the world. The global economy has to collapse first. And it does that because of warfare. Why does the global economy have to collapse? Because you have to get rid of, as I said, with the, what was it? The DQR scenario, talking about private placements, an archaic system. This is what HSBC is talking about. It's an archaic system. So you have to get rid of it. You have to destroy it. Both the perceived wealth and the debt, the slate has to be wiped clean. That's what happens in the Jubilee. See, most people don't understand this. In a 7-year Jubilee, it's not just eliminating the debts and returning properties to the original owner and the forgiveness of loans, but it means everybody has to start over. Now, it didn't do that in Jewish tradition because people were able to hold their liquid assets. They were able to hold the properties that they got back. Okay? But they lost in the forgiveness of debt. That potential income paid to them through the servicing of that debt, transaction fees and interest. So they actually lost money when the debts were forgiven. That's the 180 of the Jubilee, folks. Those that were owed monies paid back lost money in the Jubilee. That's the 180. Most of us just look at it from the debtor perspective and go, wow, yeah, that's pretty cool. My debt is forgiven. But what about the poor guy that you owed money to? He loses. And you actually lose too. Because now you have to start over. You as the debtor whose debt has been forgiven, you have to start from zero. You have no leverage, meaning capital. You have no leverage to invest. You have no leverage. You have no capital to go out and start a business, to go out and buy materials, to hire employees. You're starting from zero because your debts have been forgiven in a debt-based economy. Okay? It will be presented as a leveling of the playing field. Everybody will be inclusive. Everybody will be the same. Oh yeah? Well, what about the founders of Libra? What about the Knights of Malta? What about the Knights Templar? We understand the players of today because we understand the players in the past. And we trace the bloodlines. And therefore we know what they're going to do today because they did the same in the past. Only now it's very different than the past because now we have the technologies that allow for a single global system. And that has never been the case. There has never been a single global form of currency and a single worldwide economy, ever in the history of mankind, in recorded history. But now because of technology, promulgated by the Kabbalists, this is the first time in history there will be a one world economy and a one world dictator and a one world government and a one world religion, which is the Kabbalists' religion. And the technology driving that is the quantum mechanics that the Kabbalists have pushed. And then the development of the technology from quantum mechanics that has resulted in the ability to build out the beast system, for which you have to take the mark. Otherwise, no man will be able to buy or sell, because the technology allows for the marking of people, the tracking and surveilling, the surveilling and tracking of people, and preventing transactions to take place without that mark. It's very clear. It's very easy to understand. It's not complicated. Okay? Okay. let's wrap it up. It's a little after 9. Thank you again for all of your tremendous support of Kathleen and myself. Thank you. I hope you're enjoying this month's edition of Entangled Magazine, focusing upon nanodiamonds, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, dust identity of the nanodiamonds, Algorand of the encryption system of the blockchain system. And at the end of the magazine, I was talking about the third wave, which I discussed a little bit in the previous live stream. I'm not going to take time tonight, but look at the third wave because I went through and broke that down further for you. But there has been 3 waves towards democracy, 2 reverse waves away from democracy in the world, and now the third reverse, and that's not in the book that I cited, and I mentioned that in the magazine. We are this reverse wave, which I'm calling the tsunami of blockchain. This third reverse wave away from democracy, spreading around the world, is the reverse away from democracy to the one world government of the Antichrist. That's the reverse. That's the third wave. And it is signified, it is emblematic in the 3 waves of Libra. Libra is showing you straight in our faces the third reverse wave away from democracy, replacing it with the tsunami of the blockchain of the beast system of the Antichrist. Just the 3 waves of Libra are confirmation of what I just said. Okay. God bless you all. Thank you, and please send your prayer requests by email. We are honored to pray for any of those of you that contact us, but also the larger group of patrons here we always pray for. Thank you. Good night.